Before sunrise, Portsmouth police moved in. Doors burst open. A man was taken away in silence. To neighbours, he was just another face. To the National Crime Agency, he was the suspected leader of a Turkish network that smuggled hundreds into Britain. Boats, trucks, forged passports. His empire reached across Europe. Another arrest had already taken place in Italy. Behind both men stood a web of Kurdish gangs stretching from London to the Middle East. Their money flowed through drugs, forged papers, and blood. Their power lasted decades. How did they go for so long undetected? Let's dive in. It began quietly, a house in the Kingston area of Portsmouth, curtains drawn, nothing to suggest that inside lived one of the most wanted men in Britain's secret underworld. But at dawn the silence broke. National Crime Agency officers, backed by Hampshire police, moved in. Within minutes, a 45-year-old man was in handcuffs. Neighbours looked on in disbelief. He was known to walk his dog, wave politely, and keep to himself. Yet investigators claimed he was the head of a vast Kurdish people smuggling network that stretched from Northern Europe to the Middle East. For 2 years, the NCA had followed his every move. The operation was long, quiet, and built on intelligence from multiple countries. They believed his group had smuggled hundreds of people to the UK. Each journey was dangerous, costing thousands of pounds. Each route ended with small boats landing on British shores or stowaways hidden inside heavy goods vehicles. To the migrants, he was a savior. To the law, he was a profiteer in human suffering. As he sat in custody, another arrest echoed across Europe. In Italy, a second man was detained, believed to be a high-ranking figure in the same network. The NCA had obtained a warrant, and extradition proceedings were already underway. The arrests were linked. Two figures from the same invisible empire that had funneled desperate migrants into Britain for years. Rachel Bramley, the NCA senior investigating officer, called it a turning point. This arrest marks a significant point in an investigation that has been going on for around 2 years now, she said. Her words were measured but firm. She described a network that used a range of methods, all of which were dangerous and potentially life-threatening for those being smuggled. Behind the professional language lay a grim truth. Each small boat that crossed the channel carried the risk of death. Each lorry packed with people was a gamble between hope and suffocation. And at the heart of that trade were men who saw opportunity in misery. The Portsmouth suspect was believed to control routes not only through Europe, but deep into the Middle East. The network's influence was vast, its profits larger still. The NCA's focus was clear. Tackling organized immigration crime had become one of its top priorities. But this arrest, significant as it was, felt like one piece of a much larger puzzle. Investigators were tracing money trails, looking for partners, and mapping connections that reached far beyond Britain's borders. What made the arrest shocking wasn't just the scale of the operation, but how close it had always been. A quiet man on a normal street, a secret life hidden behind a British door. The case revealed how deeply embedded these networks had become, using UK towns as safe bases while managing operations that spanned continents. As the story spread, the question grew louder. How did a Kurdish smuggling network become so powerful inside the UK? The Portsmouth arrest was only one strand of a web woven across Europe. Behind it lay an invisible infrastructure of safe houses, fake documents, encrypted phones, and routes running through countries few could trace on a map. From the ports of France to the forests of Northern Europe, Kurdish-led smuggling groups worked with precision. The man detained in Portsmouth was believed to be one of their key coordinators, but the real strength of the network came from its reach. NCA intelligence pointed to operations stretching from the Middle East to Europe's heart. Every checkpoint, every port, had someone paid to look the other way. In Italy, investigators had already captured another senior figure. He was part of the same organization, one that specialized in moving people through Europe's backroads and ferry lines. The network's power came not from open violence, but from quiet control. It thrived on desperation, turning human migration into a business that crossed borders and languages. European investigators described the routes like arteries pumping people, money, and forged papers toward Britain. Most of the migrants came from Kurdish regions. They paid thousands to be guided through dangerous terrain, often ending up in camps near Calais before taking the final, perilous step across the channel. The smuggling crews arranged everything: boats, drivers, documents, even food. To the migrants, they offered hope. To the authorities, they represented a billion-pound shadow economy. The British National Crime Agency had begun working closely with its European counterparts. France, Belgium, Italy, and even countries in the Western Balkans shared intelligence. The goal was to cut through layers of secrecy that made prosecutions nearly impossible. The operation that led to the Portsmouth arrest was the product of this international cooperation. But even as one cell fell, others adapted. New leaders emerged, new routes opened. Each successful crossing strengthened the network's reputation. Migrants would spread the word of who could get them through, who was reliable, and who to avoid. The organization became more than a smuggling ring. It became a trusted brand within migrant communities, even as authorities labeled it criminal. The money moved just as efficiently as the people. Funds were transferred through informal systems, disguised in legitimate trade, or processed through businesses operating under false names. This financial invisibility made prosecution difficult. The same structure that allowed goods to move legally through Europe now shielded criminal transactions. In interviews, British investigators admitted the challenge. Every arrest seemed to reveal 10 new names. Each route exposed another layer of corruption or complicity. The Kurdish networks had learned to evolve faster than the systems meant to stop them. As borders tightened and surveillance increased, the smugglers only grew smarter. They forged alliances with Balkan gangs, Middle Eastern brokers, and document forgers scattered across Europe. To dismantle one operation was to face another already rising in its place. The Portsmouth arrest had pulled the curtain back, but what it revealed was an empire, not a single man. It was a hidden Europe connected by trust, money, and fear. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer one name became: the PKK. For decades, the Kurdistan Workers' Party had been fighting in Turkey, but beyond the battlefield, it built another kind of empire, one made of money, drugs, and control. According to intelligence shared across Europe, Kurdish gangs in the United Kingdom were part of that structure. The same networks that moved heroin through the continent were also raising funds for the organization. In London, those links became impossible to ignore. A former member of the Tottenham Boys, one of North London's most feared Kurdish gangs, spoke about it openly. He called himself Ali. For his safety, he never used his real name. They're all connected to the organization, he told Anadolu agency. He meant the PKK. It runs its operations from Haringey, from the Kurdish Community Center. Ali described how every Kurdish gang in the capital paid a fee to the organization. It was not a request, but an obligation. That payment, he said, was a license to operate. Refusal meant trouble. The PKK's influence reached from street corners to community halls, blurring the line between ideology and profit. The Tottenham Boys were not alone. Alongside them were the Hackney Bombers, and the group led by Hayri Gostas, known as Adnan Ali Hayri. Together, they controlled much of London's drug trade. Around 400 men were said to operate under the Tottenham Boys alone. They dealt in Class A and Class B drugs, heroin, cocaine, and cannabis, using violence to secure their dominance. The profits fed both criminal ambition and political loyalty. The Metropolitan Police had been aware of these connections for years. Intelligence reports described extortion, racketeering, and brutal enforcement within Kurdish neighborhoods. Businesses were forced to pay protection money, often under the banner of community support. Those who refused were threatened or attacked. Yet the organization's structure made it hard to strike. There were no open banners or visible leaders, only quiet orders passed through trusted intermediaries. Ali's words painted a grim picture of loyalty mixed with fear. They all pay the organization, they have to, otherwise they'll be on the wrong side, he said. Inside Haringey's Kurdish Community Center, Leaders acted as mediators when disputes broke out among gangs. The center itself, he explained, was not filled with drugs or weapons, but the people inside it knew everyone who mattered. Meanwhile, violence continued on the streets. Gang rivalries often ended in blood. Members were killed by rivals or betrayed by their own. The murder of DJ Kore Alpagin, a London-based Turkish radio owner, was one such case whispered to be linked to those circles. He was kidnapped in Enfield and later found dead in Essex. Police investigations were ongoing, but in the community, suspicion pointed toward the same Kurdish underworld. The PKK's reach was no longer confined to conflict zones. Europol and the European Parliament reported that the group controlled up to 80% of Europe's heroin market, generating around $1.5 billion annually. That money financed its operations across continents, and Britain, quietly, had become one of its most profitable territories. It was not only heroin anymore. Cocaine routes were expanding. The same gangs that once smuggled people were now moving drugs and laundering the profits. Their power grew in the shadows of London, under the same name that had fought for independence thousands of miles away. The PKK's empire was more than political. It was criminal, global, and deeply rooted inside the UK. In North London's underworld, the name the Tottenham Boys opened doors and closed mouths. To the outside world, they did not exist, but to those who knew them, they were untouchable. Their power was not loud or chaotic. It was organized, calculated, and inherited through years of control. What began as a small Kurdish street crew had evolved into one of London's most structured criminal organizations. Their influence reached far beyond drug corners. It shaped the very rhythm of the city's underground economy. A former member known only as Ali spoke of them with a mix of fear and familiarity. He said they operated more like businessmen than street thugs. Every operation had a chain of command, every deal a signature. They all pay the organization, he explained, referring to the PKK-linked leadership that oversaw their activities. It was less about belief and more about survival. Paying meant protection. Refusing meant disappearance. Their control over North London's drug routes was only part of the story. The Tottenham Boys understood that real power came from diversification. They moved money through clubs, betting shops, and protection rackets. They lent cash at crushing interest rates, collected debts with quiet threats, and managed security at venues that doubled as fronts. Violence was reserved for moments when diplomacy failed. Fear was their more efficient weapon. The Kurdish community center at Haringey sat at the heart of their world, not as a stash house, but as neutral ground. Leaders from rival factions would gather there under the watch of elders connected to the wider Kurdish movement. Disputes were settled, profits divided, and peace restored, at least temporarily. The police could never prove criminal activity inside, but they knew decisions made there shaped London's criminal landscape. The Metropolitan Police had long monitored the group. Intelligence reports detailed extortion cases against local Kurdish businesses. Shop owners were forced to contribute to community causes masked as organized taxation. Behind every envelope of cash was the unspoken authority of the Tottenham Boys and the organization that sanctioned them. When members were imprisoned, replacements stepped in effortlessly. The system was self-sustaining. Loyalty, family ties, and ideology kept it alive. One name stood out among their leaders: Hayri Gostas, known as Adanali Hayri. Convicted in 2004 for exporting heroin, he had managed to avoid deportation to Turkey after his release. Sources claimed he provided information to authorities, buying himself time and freedom. When he resurfaced, he wasted none of it. He quickly reclaimed lost territory through his operations in Haringey and Dalston. Business owners who resisted were threatened, some losing everything overnight. Within their community, the Tottenham Boys occupied an uncomfortable space. Some saw them as protectors, men who defended Kurdish interests in a foreign land. Others saw them for what they were, a criminal machine that fed on fear while funding causes thousands of miles away. By the mid-2020s, their structure had survived every crackdown, every raid. Arrests barely scratched the surface. Their strength was not in one leader, but in the system itself, a blend of loyalty, profit, and political obligation. The Tottenham Boys had become more than a gang. They were a model for how organized crime could exist quietly within modern Britain, disciplined enough to endure and powerful enough to remain unseen. Beneath London's modern skyline, another city thrived in silence. It had no offices, no legal contracts, no public records. Yet its economy was vast, built on narcotics, fear, and loyalty. Kurdish gangs, Albanian groups, and remnants of older British crews shared this shadow world. But one network stood at its center. From Haringey to Hackney, from Dalston to Enfield, the Kurdish-run operations shaped how drugs moved through the capital. The system worked like a business chain. Importers brought in heroin and cocaine through trusted European routes. Distributors divided the product and passed it to local operators. Street dealers handled the final link, working on credit under constant watch. Each stage of the chain owed money upward, feeding profits into the hands of a few who would never see. It was a structure designed to survive police raids, rival takeovers, and even imprisonment. The Tottenham boys, the Hackney bombers, and Harry Gostas's crew were not rivals in the usual sense. They often fought, but they also understood balance. Too much conflict drew police attention, too little, and power went stale. Alliances formed and broke with the rhythm of profit. When one group lost ground, another filled the gap, often using the same supply lines. The goal was control, not chaos. Police reports painted a grim picture. Kurdish gangs had seized a monopoly on drug distribution across much of North London. Their operations extended into nightlife, construction, and even logistics firms. Any business that could move goods or launder cash. Cocaine came from South America, heroin from Afghanistan, and cannabis from both Turkey and local farms. Everything flowed through Kurdish intermediaries who handled transport, payment, and enforcement. This empire did not rely on visible power. Its leaders avoided social media, publicity, or public disputes. Their authority rested on silence and efficiency. Violence was rare, but precise. A beating, a disappearance, a burned car. Each message was short and understood. A former insider told investigators that drug money was not the end goal. It's fuel, he said. It keeps everything moving from the streets here to places you'll never see. That money funded the PKK's European networks, supported smuggling operations, and paid for political causes in exile communities. It blurred the line between crime and ideology. Meanwhile, ordinary Londoners lived around this hidden economy without ever noticing. A quiet cafe in Haringey might serve as a meeting point. A repair shop in Dalston could be a cover for laundering money. Rental properties in Enfield changed tenants every few months, hiding transient figures who managed supply and logistics. Each layer made the next one harder to reach. The Metropolitan Police called it one of the most integrated drug operations in modern Britain. Every level depended on the next. Arrests came and went, but the flow continued. Even after major seizures, the drugs were replaced within weeks. The empire had mastered adaptation. The Kurdish gang's success came not just from organization, but from invisibility. They blended into immigrant communities, speaking languages few outsiders understood. Their leaders moved carefully, blending crime with community work, creating confusion for authorities and sympathy among locals. By the time the government called it a crisis, London's drug empire was already a self-sustaining living system, older than most of the men running it. Behind every small boat and hidden truck lay an intricate network that made illegal migration possible. It began thousands of miles from Britain's shores and passed through some of Europe's most unstable corridors. For years, the UK's National Crime Agency had been tracing the arteries that fed this trade. What they found was not chaos, it was design. The Kurdish-led networks had mastered logistics. They moved people, documents, and money with the precision of a corporation, relying on a chain of trusted contacts stretching from the Middle East through the Balkans and into Western Europe. The Western Balkans became a key passage. Through Albania, Kosovo, and Serbia, smugglers offered routes that promised safety but delivered danger. Lorries, fishing boats, and vans were used to carry desperate migrants, each of whom paid thousands for the journey. These were not small-time operators. The networks functioned with division of labor organizers, drivers, boat owners, and document forgers. Each stage had its specialists. The NCA believed that the Portsmouth suspect and his European partners coordinated many of these transfers, exploiting both land and sea routes. In July 2025, the UK government struck back. Under the newly created Global Irregular Migration Sanctions regime, the Foreign Office unveiled the second wave of sanctions against people smuggling organizations. This marked the first time in history that a country had built a sanctions system specifically to target organized migration crime. The crackdown exposed a new set of players, forgery networks and financial enablers who kept the trade alive. One such group was the Krasniki network in Kosovo. Led by Buram Krasniki, it operated a professional forgery laboratory that produced fake passports, driving licenses, and identity cards for more than 50 countries, including the UK. Within the group, members had defined roles. Arif Krasniki sourced clients, Flamur Valon and Sami Duriki handled document production, while Nishmir Selmani provided premises and equipment. Their work was precise enough to fool border systems and airport checks. Granit Avdili advertised their services discreetly online, attracting criminal clients across Europe. Alongside them operated Nusret Seferovic, the leader of a Croatian gang that specialized in selling fake Croatian passports to Balkan groups. Seferovic's method was simple but effective. He identified citizens who had never collected their official passports, used their data to create counterfeits, and sold the documents to organized crime groups such as the Scagliari and Kavac gangs, both already sanctioned under the UK's new migration regime. These forgeries opened doors across Europe and allowed people smugglers to move freely under new identities. The financial side of the trade was just as sophisticated. The Alpa network, based in Dubai and operating through Alpa Trading FCCO, handled payments for smuggling gangs. They processed money transfers and bought small boat components, engines, fuel, and safety gear used for channel crossings. Two brothers, Ali and Vahid Derekshan, oversaw the company's daily operations, moving funds through layers of offshore accounts. The sanctions hit these networks hard, freezing assets and banning travel to the UK. But enforcement alone could not dismantle their foundation. The routes they used were old, shaped by decades of conflict, poverty, and displacement. Every crackdown only pushed them to adapt to new suppliers, new fronts, and new technologies. By the time the Prime Minister hosted the Western Balkans Summit in London, intelligence agencies had mapped the trade's full ecosystem. The same highways that once carried goods through Europe were now carrying people. From the mountains of Kosovo to the ports of Calais, each stop along the way was another point in a billion-pound chain. The Western Balkans had long been a place where borders blurred and power shifted quietly. After the wars of the 1990s, weak institutions and corruption left space for something else to grow profit without accountability. It was here that Kurdish smugglers and Balkan gangs found common ground. One had the networks, the other had the routes. Together they turned the region into Europe's most profitable crossroads for illegal migration and organized crime. Money was their language. From Kosovo's backstreets to London's financial hubs, cash moved faster than law. Fake passports, forged IDs, and counterfeit driving licenses became as valuable as weapons. The Krasniki network, based in Kosovo, was one of the key producers. Its workshop was small but efficient, creating false papers for over 50 countries. In the same region, Croatian gang leader Nusret Seferovic ran a business selling genuine-looking Croatian passports to crime groups who needed new identities. The combination of Kurdish demand and Balkan supply created a powerful economy that thrived in the shadows of Europe's politics. The profits were staggering. Each forged document, each safe passage, meant another payment routed through offshore companies like Alpa Trading FCCO. From Dubai, money flowed through hidden accounts, buying boat engines and transport equipment for smugglers. Investigators discovered that these transfers passed through legitimate financial systems, proof that criminal finance had learned to wear a clean face. By the time British intelligence traced the links, the networks had already evolved. Some gangs used crypto payments, others hid transactions in trade deals involving spare parts and machinery. No single country could stop it because the system relied on constant movement. When one route closed, another opened through a different border. For the Kurdish groups, the Balkans offered more than access. It offered protection. Bribes bought silence, and shared profits built loyalty among local partners. Albanian and Serbian groups handled storage, transport, and enforcement, while Kurdish leaders coordinated crossings and payments from afar. It was an alliance of necessity built on trust, fear, and profit. By the summer of 2025, Britain's patience had worn thin. For years, police had chased smugglers through ports, raided safe houses, and seized small boats. But the machine kept running. Every arrest felt like removing one link from an endless chain, so the strategy changed. Instead of chasing the runners, the government decided to suffocate the system itself. The fight would now target money, not movement. That shift gave birth to the global irregular migration sanctions regime, an entirely new model of enforcement. It treated smuggling as a global business network rather than scattered criminal cells. The logic was simple. If gangs could not use banks, trade, or travel, their influence would collapse from within. The government began naming individuals and companies, publicly removing their anonymity, the very thing that had kept them safe for decades. When the sanctions list was published, it revealed the scope of Britain's new reach. Forgers, financiers, and traffickers were no longer invisible. Some were based in the Western Balkans, others in the Middle East or mainland Europe. Each had played a role in the system that funneled migrants across borders. Instead of catching boats in the Channel, the UK was now freezing bank accounts in Pristina and blocking transactions in Dubai. Prime Minister Keir Starmer described it as a new front in a global fight. He was joined by Yvette Cooper, who called the people smuggling economy a business of cruelty built on fear and profit. Together they introduced asset freezes, travel bans, and joint intelligence sharing with Balkan countries. This cooperation halved border crossings and virtually eliminated the flow of small boats from Albania. But sanctions did more than punish. They exposed. They showed how criminal profits passed through legal systems, hidden in plain sight. Shell companies traded in machinery or boat parts, but their real purpose was to move money for smugglers. When these transactions were blocked, networks scrambled to find new ways to pay each other. Some turned to cryptocurrency, others reverted to cash couriers. The crackdown did not destroy the empire, but it fractured it. What had once seemed untouchable began to splinter under financial pressure. Yet for investigators it was clear. Sanctions could wound the networks, but not end them. For every name struck off the books, another would rise elsewhere. Proof that the empire's true power had never been its leaders, but its ability to adapt. When the arrests, sanctions, and headlines faded, only silence remained. The Kurdish networks had learned to live beneath it. Each operation dismantled by the authorities was soon replaced by another, quieter one. The faces changed, the routes shifted, but the structure endured. In the UK, Kurdish communities continued to grow, most of them entirely lawful and far removed from organized crime. Yet within that same space, a handful of groups maintained invisible control over smuggling, extortion, and drugs. They blended into legitimate life using businesses, charities, and social circles as their cover. The line between community and enterprise remained deliberately blurred. Law enforcement saw progress, boats intercepted, gangs arrested, assets frozen, but the truth was more complex. The empire had adapted, learning to hide within systems it once defied. Some former enforcers turned into financiers, others shifted their operations abroad, using technology to command from a distance. The profits flowed through digital channels now, harder to trace, easier to deny. The Kurdish empire that once ruled London's streets had changed form. It was no longer about territory or power displays, it was about endurance. In North London, the legacy of the Tottenham boys lived on in whispers. In Portsmouth, neighbours still spoke of the quiet man taken at dawn, and across Europe, investigators still mapped connections that began decades earlier in the mountains of Turkey. The empire had been wounded, exposed, and scattered, but not erased. Its lesson was simple and sobering. Crime that grows from desperation and opportunity cannot be destroyed by force alone. It must be understood, dismantled piece by piece, and replaced with something better. And until that happens, the untouchable empire will never truly disappear.